What I will say about Hoka and any maximal shoe, they are trying to really leverage cushion is comfort. And that's actually not the case. Every surface that we move on is designed to vibrate. If you strike a surface and the surface does not vibrate, you get this back reverberation, which is painful. The most efficient foot strike technique for running is going to be more of a midfoot, and then they do heel, and then they take off. Sprinting, totally different. Sprinting is not the same as distance running.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Beta Podcast. I'm really excited to welcome Dr. Emily today. This is really going to be a fun one. And just a visual for you guys. Probably wondering, why do I have so many dirty shoes on my table? So we're going to play around. I got a bunch of different shoes with me today, and we're going to spend some time really talking about different ones. This is an Ultra Solstice. So we're going to be referencing some things today. This is like the zero drop, right? So we're looking at like flat across the whole thing. Have a Vivo Barefoot here. This one looks even flatter. And I have two maybe not so great examples we're going to pull up today. Is a bad one. This is the Nike. Very narrow toe box. This is the toe box. And it is flat across. It's probably got like about an inch. And the bottom there is the sole. And then my last example here, which is going to be this really beat up Nike as well. Large heel, it kind of drops into it here, and it's also got pretty decent narrow toe box. So Dr. Emily is actually the specialist to ask on this because she's so knowledgeable in a lot of different ways. But I'd love to hear, just first off, how did you get into this? What was your motivation to get into this line of work?
Yeah, first, thank you so much for having me on. I absolutely love to talk about feet and footwear, so this is a great opportunity. But as a functional podiatrist, my appreciation for the integrated foot really began partly as me being a competitive gymnast for 13 years. So I just appreciate the foot in really its most bare form because gymnastics is a barefoot sport. Then I got into fitness. And when I was going through podiatry school, I still stayed in fitness. I was still a trainer, still teaching classes. So very much into movement, not just feet, but obviously how feet connect to movement. And then when I really launched my career, finished residency and my medical training was when the book Born to Run came out. So everyone was talking about shoes, looking at minimal shoes, looking at feet, looking at running technique. And that really just positioned me to focus on what authentically resonated with me, which goes back to movement. So even as a podiatrist, I'm really a movement specialist, and I was actually a consultant for Nike for numerous years in their innovation kitchen when they had the Nike Free. And I came in as a podiatrist, really helping to guide them in natural foot function and natural footwear. Eventually, they pushed away from that type of footwear, which we can talk about, of course.
All right, Dr. Emily. So I run a gym in New Jersey, and I work with large array of people, and oftentimes I get people really excited coming to me telling me I've picked up my running habit again, I just got new shoes. That gets me excited about running. And my doctor recommended these Hokas, and it's just instant feedback. It's amazing. They feel great. And then I feel like I'm in a funny position because I don't necessarily believe that running with a giant cloud on your foot is the best option for them long term, but short term their doctor is telling them to do it, and the immediate feedback they get is, oh, this is comfortable, it must be great. And then I have them for a very short window of time, an hour a day. I don't want to scare them away. I want to encourage them. If I were to clip, a moment of you kind of telling your opinion on footwear for running for, I don't know, somebody trying to get back into running, what do you think about Hokas, and what do you think is the best approach to sustainable, healthy running for your body?
Yes. So the Hoka, they do a lot of marketing. I think they just brought on some, massive investor or something because they've really pushed into the media spotlight. Ads are everywhere. I know they're a huge sponsor at Lifetime Gym. So you will see them everywhere in certain commercial clubs, which then pushes towards the consumer to then say, oh, well, they must be good because I see them everywhere in my gym, right? And I see my trainers wearing them because Hoka gave the trainer the pair of shoes for free. So they're wearing them. So that's the power of marketing. What I will say about Hoka and any maximal shoe is that they are trying to really leverage cushion is comfort. And that's actually not the case, but people associate cushion with comfort. It's like lying on a memory foam bed or mattress, is there's this association, right? I like to educate and have people really understand foot anatomy, foot function, and the appropriateness of certain shoes at certain times. Now, do I recommend Hoka for my patients? Sure, at certain times. I like a Hoka, for example, being a nurse standing on concrete for 8 to 10 hours. Absolutely love Hoka for that. Hoka also has a built-in 4-foot rocker. So there's a carbon fiber rocker that is across that shoe, which allows you to roll through the shoe, not through your big toe joint. So this is great for people who have arthritis in their big toe joint or arthritis in other parts of their foot, because you're shifting that range of motion to the shoe. That's actually good, and some people need that. So I think understanding the appropriateness of some of these features of shoes, we can go into the different features of footwear and how people look at it. The last thing I will say about this is that when I look at shoes, I go based off of 3 things. So you don't want to decide on a shoe purely based off of marketing, and you also don't want to go off a shoe based off of what might work for your trainer or your coach, because they might not have the same foot type, right? So we want to make decisions based off of our own foot type. That's the first one. High arch, flat feet, limited range of motion, whatever, totally neutral foot. I'm not sure what it is, but that's what your first decision is. Second is any injury history. Do you have a history of plantar fasciitis? Do you have a bunion? Do you have known limited ankle range of motion? Do you have a history of ankle sprains? Whatever it is, you have your history, injury history. And then third is going to be the demands that you're putting under your foot. Are you running in the shoe? Are you standing on concrete? Is this your errand shoe? Do you wear this around your house? What are the demands that you're putting your foot under? And you use those 3 things to make then a more educated, calculated decision off of the appropriate footwear.
Thank you, Dr. Emily. Hearing the answer to that question, it is making me realize that this is a much more complex issue than my mind tends to make things.
It is.
I used to be a distance runner with looking for the biggest heel on a shoe, and I had this giant stride, and I ran fast, but my hips and lower back always took such a devastating beating. And then the day that I was inspired by the concept of barefoot running, I went complete 180 and ran 5 miles in barefoot shoes, and my Achilles and calves didn't recover for like 6 weeks. But it's hard for me not to be an extremist where, once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once I understood that the heel affected my hips and back so negatively, I almost went extreme and recommended to everybody, like, spend time barefoot, use toe spacers, get your toes more involved and get them moving. I still want to send this message that people don't have their feet stuck in this cast of a shoe, but I also don't want to overdose somebody. So for somebody who is not familiar with barefoot training at all, what would be a good way to introduce somebody to creating more dexterity and strength throughout their foot and their toes? For instance, my feet are just so tight, and I want to get them more functional, but I don't know how to begin that process at the right dosage that it's actually effective, but not overdoing it. How would you recommend a beginner get into that?
Yeah, absolutely. So one, I would not change the shoes right away. I get that there were many people with that super excited and went from super cushioned to minimal, just like you. And that gave minimal shoes bad press because people were getting injured, and it wasn't the shoe, it was the transition and just kind of the timing of it. But again, everyone has been there at some point with something. The way that I recommend it before switching shoes is start to get into the habit of just prioritizing your feet, focusing on your feet, waking up your feet. So using toe spacers. Wear the shoes that you're doing. Don't change anything, but at the end of the day, slide on toe spacers and wear them 15 to 30 minutes every evening as just a reset for your feet. Can you get in the habit of releasing your feet on a neural ball, lacrosse ball, tennis ball, something every morning, every evening, couple minutes? Do it when you brush your teeth. Okay, we're starting to prioritize the feet. Then can you take it a little bit further and actually wake up the muscles of your feet? There are 26 muscles in the bottom of your feet, small muscles, 26, that play a very important role in foot strength, balance, push off, just whatever you would want to harness from your foot, starts with those 26 muscles. I love to do an exercise called short foot, which is where you push your toes into the floor. That actually wakes up these muscles. But I also love balance exercises. So just start incorporating single leg exercises into your routine. And I tell people to do this in the morning. If you're waiting for your coffee, stand on one leg. You're technically waking up your foot muscles. I like to do everything in series when I'm getting ready in the morning. So release your feet, couple minutes, brush your teeth. Then there's an exercise called a forward lean, where you stand with your feet shoulder width apart and you literally just lean your body forward, kind of like a ski jumper, and you lean forward, stay stiff as a board, come back. It's actually going to wake up your foot muscles, and then transition to standing on one leg for 10 seconds, go to the other leg for 10 seconds, do that a couple times, boom. You've actually activated your foot and woke up those muscles. So it's very easy to do this. Then we start to explore, okay, let's go more minimal. In the gym, when we're lifting, it's a controlled environment. Okay. Or walk around the office. If you happen to wear shoes in your house, I'm not a big believer in that, but if you do, then that's where you could start to wear minimal shoes. I lived in New York City for 20 years, so I would tell people, do not do your commute in minimal shoes on day one, because you actually are walking a lot more than you realize. That you want it in the office, in the gym, in your home. Okay. And then you start to increase from there.
That's outstanding. Thank you. I love the actual tangible action steps that are small and can build momentum and consistency. But I'm also realizing maybe I got ahead of myself. Why is it important to pay attention to the feet at all? Because if somebody doesn't know why this is important, the great advice you just gave is meaningless. Like, how can we sell somebody on it all starts from the feet? And I'm not going to say anymore. Let me know.
Yeah, no, so it does. And I'm not making that up, but it literally does. I'll start with your feet. So if you think of us standing, walking, running, squats, whatever it is that you're doing, the only contact point between the ground and your body is your feet. And it's actually more specifically the skin in the bottom of the feet. This is why, as a podiatrist, I take very much of a sensory approach. I don't take a heavy biomechanical approach to foot function. I look at it as really this neurological myofascial function, which is very unique in podiatry. But being the only contact point between the body and the ground, that's really where your stability starts. That's where your sense of posture. So how does your foot posture connect to your center of gravity or your center of mass? How do you connect to your pelvis? They happen to be fascially connected as well. And then when let's say you're doing a squat, how do you generate power from the ground up versus thinking of a squat purely from the basis of a hip action, right? Because your feet are still on the ground. So how could you actually harness strength and stability through the foot to your center and then think about your hip strength? So that's how I like to think about movement. When we walk dynamically, your foot strikes the ground. You're experiencing ground reaction forces that's happening through your foot up the rest of the body. So the first gatekeeper, or what's reading these impact forces, is your foot. Most injuries in runners are overuse related, and a lot of those overuse injuries are because of a disconnect with ground reaction forces, or really an altered relationship. People just don't understand impact forces. They don't know how we perceive them. They're not tuned into them. And then you essentially start to get overloaded and these overuse injuries. So literally everything starts with your feet, your foot posture, your foot perception, foot to ground perception, and then foot to core stability. And this is essentially my career. This is all I talk about. This is what we're just talking about right now, is this bucket, because I was never taught that in podiatry school, which means I'm getting patient referrals who are thinking of it in a very traditional way, still getting injured or still not getting better. And then they're frustrated and they're like, I need a fresh perspective because this traditional way is not working for my body.
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And just for context, this is a toe spacer. And as you can tell, me and Kevin are pretty are pretty biased because we're really into shoes and we're really into a lot of the stuff Dr. Emily's talking about. But I would love to talk to you about the most common argument I get made back against when I wear barefoot shoes. So this is my Vivo barefoot. I wear this like very often. And you see in a camera, there's like literally, there's like almost nothing between my foot and the ground. And the most common argument I get back is, Yash, barefoot shoes were really cool back in the day when we were walking on dirt and walking on grass. But now if you're walking on concrete all the time, even if your feet are like theoretically like accustomed to it, genetically we're not built for that. I would love to hear if you've ever got that argument back before and what you usually say to those people.
Yeah, the funny thing is there was this podiatry lecture last night, and I never have a free evening where I could do this. I was like, I'm actually going to listen to an educational from podiatry. And they literally started that same thing. And they said, every foot needs to be in a supportive shoe. Every foot needs to be an orthotic. We walk on unnatural surfaces. We are no longer in the wild hunting in the wilderness. We are on artificial. And I was like, what is happening? Like, it is like literally feeding the not the lie, but kind of this altered belief that is just regurgitated. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had to hang up and I don't know, just took a walk barefoot or something. But so in people who say that, one, we understand this, right? So concrete and artificial surfaces, they are reality. They are very hard on our physiology. That's why I often give the example of nurses standing on their feet on concrete or first responders. So you do see certain injuries in people who have to stand on their feet on concrete all day, which is very unnatural. Accept it. Okay. But where you're wearing the minimal shoes or how you experience this artificial environment is in a more natural way. You are moving, and we are designed to move when you are lifting. So I'll always go back to minimal shoes in a gym, which is a controlled environment where you are trying to activate and create this optimal strength, natural strength, as much as we can in an artificial environment. So you have to, right? It's how do we coexist in the environment we live today? That's really what it is. So you have to pull as much natural as you can into the reality of today's environment. And that's what my belief is, right? So it doesn't mean go full cushion in this artificial environment, because then you are essentially becoming subjective to the artificialness of what it is, if this makes sense, right? So to me, everything is about a balance, right? Understand and respect the concrete. How do you use minimal shoes, which is going to keep your feet stronger? And there's research studies that now demonstrates that wearing minimal shoes, such as Vivo Barefoot, has been demonstrated through research studies that it will strengthen your foot. You get increased strength of the intrinsic muscles. You get hypertrophy. You get actually measured toe flexor strength increase when you chronically use minimal shoes. Chronically meaning every day, right? That's a benefit. That's a win. But then you could say, okay, I get that concrete is hard on the body. So if I wear them maybe a little bit too long and I get complacent on my foot recovery and I start to feel my heel or my plantar fascia, I get it. I need to increase my foot recovery, maybe take a little day or two off of the Vivo Barefoot shoes, knowing that they're a little bit harder on my feet. Go to your Ultra, which is technically a little bit more transitional. And you then say, okay, I'm going to bring in a little bit of cushion, knowing that concrete is hard and that concrete is starting to show a stress response on my foot. Once that goes down, let me go back to the minimal shoes, meaning truly minimal, like a Vivo, so I can maintain as much natural foot strength as possible in this artificial environment. Like that's how I do it, right? And that still might not convince anyone. They still might be saying bullshit to that argument. I have no idea. But to me, it's the same thing as someone eating organic versus these mass-produced food that's not natural. Like it's how do you maintain as natural as possible with every aspect of the body? How do you sleep in as a natural environment as possible? And that's really what we're all trying to do, and find a balance of what we have, the technology and the environment today, with trying to maintain this natural existence as possible.
So I'm fortunate to live 5 minutes from an amazing park that has a ton of trails. And I noticed that when I run on the road, I pay a price in my ankles, in my feet, in my hips, in my back, in my knees. And when I run on the trails, it seems to come at far less cost. However, there seems to be a belief for fitness enthusiasts that are in my circle that trail running is more difficult and more challenging, and therefore is almost like a fear. They don't want to approach it. Anecdotally, I know it's actually more sustainable for me and it's more gentle on my body, but I use bro science to explain why it feels better for me, but I don't understand exactly, yeah, it's more natural terrain versus an artificial concrete, but what is it about the uneven terrain of a dirt trail that is so much more forgiving on my body? Because I can see how logically you would think hills and roots and awkwardness would actually be a negative effect, but my experience is it's the opposite. So besides my own anecdotal bro science, like what is it about that makes it so much more friendly to my body?
Yeah, so there's actually two things that I would refer to that. First one is going to be about the surface sciences that I was just talking about, how concrete is very unforgiving. Every surface that we move on is designed to vibrate. So when your foot strikes a surface, this is my dining table. So when I'm hitting this, which is wood, now my dog, sorry, my dog got triggered. So when you knock on something, you walking or running, what's making sound when I hit the wood is vibration. Imagine that as your foot striking a surface. So natural surfaces, wood is natural, vibrate. Grass, dirt, earth vibrates. Suspended group exercise studios vibrate because they're suspended. Old dance studios, I remember in New York, the whole floor would flex because they're just these old wood floors that don't have concrete between each layer. They flex and they vibrate to give you the sensory stimulation of your movement, of the jump, of the run, how you're striking the ground. That's how we're supposed to move. Concrete, tile, even the thick rubber flooring on like weightlifting floors, which under it is concrete, there's no vibration or information coming through, which is harder on the body. Let me take it one step further. You can think of it, so this is the ground, and if those are listening to audio, I'm showing that I'm going to like hit my fist together. One fist is the ground. The other fist is your foot. When we strike the ground, when we're walking, running, jumping, you strike the ground, you need both the surface and your foot to vibrate, like two cymbals, right? Boom, then they are resonating. If you strike a surface and the surface does not vibrate, you get this back reverberation into your body, which is painful. It's stressful. It's jarring to your lower back. It's jarring to your joints because there is this toleration window of vibration that is expected and can be tolerated with each foot strike. And this is based off of Dr. Ben O'Neill and the muscle tuning theory is what I'm talking about right now. So running on concrete is essentially harder on the body because the concrete does not take the vibration as you are striking the surface as well. Does that make sense? So it's going to be harder on the body. When you're on the trail, you're running, natural surface, it's vibrating, it's more in resonance with your body and how your body takes vibration, which is impact forces. The other aspects, that's the first one. Second one is that when you are trail running, and this is demonstrated through research studies, you are more present. So you are aware, you're looking where your foot is being placed. So the accuracy of your foot placement is going to be higher. You're tuned in, right? So you're very intentional in your foot placement, not just where, but how, right? You're actually listening to your foot. When we're on concrete, we're like, wow, we're tuned out. You're thinking about something, you're listening to the music, you're just a little less present. And then that means that you could be striking much harder than you actually should be on the concrete, or maybe your foot placement is a little bit less accurate, is a little overstrided, things like that. That combination is what you're essentially describing.
I love that you brought in the just presence and awareness and purpose of what you're doing. I can relate it. 2 days ago, I had a 6 mile trail race that I do every year at my nephew's, but I'm currently nursing an Achilles injury. So this year I was registered. I wanted to support my nephews, but I knew it wasn't appropriate for me to run. So I decided to walk it. And a half mile in, I was just like bored and it was hard not to run. So I removed my shoes and I walked through the woods for 5.5 miles, totally barefoot. And for 5.5 miles, I did not trip one time. I never took a faulty step. I never stubbed a toe. I never stepped on anything inappropriate. And I had about 50 people call me a lunatic the whole time, telling me how dangerous it was, saying, you're going to hurt yourself. And when I'm running with shoes on, I'll trip and stumble frequently. But as soon as my shoes were not on, I was dialed into every detail of what I was doing. My body felt great afterwards. My Achilles felt great. My feet felt great. I had never done that really before for that type of a distance. But like you said, being connected to what you're actually doing, being mindful, being present, being purposeful, I shocked myself with it. And I don't think a lot of people ever even give themselves the opportunity to know that that's an element of responsibility when it comes to movement.
Oh, 100%. That is honestly my phase, like the phase that I'm in of my career, of what my message is. For the longest time, it was about like barefoot, foot function, foot to core. And it was very performance based. How do we maximize glute activation? How do you maximize vertical jumps? Certain, kind of athletic outcomes. Now I'm kind of in this phase of perception, awareness, tuned in almost like a deeper way, which goes back to honestly me being a gymnast. Is gymnasts have such a high level of body perception that is the only way that you can flip, land, know where you are in space, land on a 4-inch beam, right? Just even looking at Simone Biles, as she's essentially the epitome of peak body perception and spatial awareness while she is rotating relative to external objects such as a vault or the beam, right? And it's something that is, I think, more and more underappreciated, or is maybe starting to be appreciated more through the increasing awareness of minimal shoes and barefoot movement.
Definitely. I love that. It makes a lot of sense. And I loved your visual of the two fists together. I'm putting two fists together right now for the audio listeners, where one side is your foot and the other side is, what you're making contact with. And what that reminded me of was I used to run a lot back when I was in high school, and I worked with a lot of strength and conditioning coaches that couldn't really put a finger on it. But what they would actually tell me was that you shouldn't run on a treadmill, because they actually made the same reference where they told me that instead of foot on concrete, it's foot on like a moving surface. I'm curious, what's your thoughts on, long distance runners, or just in general, like the average person running on treadmills for your feet?
So from a foot awareness, I actually like doing movement assessments on treadmills, and I teach people that that's where they should start because it's a controlled environment. If you do a gait assessment, walking, running, and the person is walking or running away from you, it's obviously very hard to like train your eye to capture this moment. So I'll teach people you have to be there and just stare at one foot over and over and over, and you're just looking at every phase of gait on that one foot on a treadmill so that you can really appreciate what the foot is doing. So it is unnatural in the sense that you are not moving relative to a fixed surface, right? You had said the belt is moving. So the actual movement efficiency doesn't translate to then road running or track running on a treadmill. So if people are pacing on a treadmill, they just need to know it's going to be harder, more effort to maintain that pace on a track or a road. That's one thing. There is increased horizontal shear force on a treadmill, so people just have to understand that. I've had patients before where so the belt is moving and your foot contacts the belt, and it's essentially like that, right? It's a very, very rapid moment in time where the ground is moving and your foot is moving. Where I've had patients have blistering issues. It happened to be a technique issue, that their technique on a treadmill with that level of horizontal shear just wasn't working for their technique. And they were getting a lot of blisters from their shoe relative to this. And that was just something that I had to fix, was the treadmill technique to not get blisters. But, I get it. I get it. Cold weather, some people are on the East Coast or the Midwest, and they're just like, my reality of my environment is I cannot run outside due to the temperatures, and I don't have access to an indoor track. What is my option? Right? So it would be an example of a reality. It's a reality. How do we work with it?
Definitely. That makes a lot of sense. And I'm just recalling of this. One time I ran on this really, really, really nice engineered German treadmill. And apparently the PT that I was working with said there was only like 3 of them in the world. And it was really cool. It had like, it was able to measure your gait, all of it had a built-in force plate into it. It needs to be able to measure that, the actual contact. And it also had like 30 cameras around you recording you. So it was the most unreal experience. After I ran on that, I actually haven't ran on treadmills anymore just because it's been so fun. But, I would love to hear about the actual performance aspect of feet. So a lot of arguments that I get are that the companies that are making these shoes put in like millions and millions of dollars. And this is specifically for the sport. So like basketball shoes, soccer shoes, track and field shoes. I'm curious your take on how much like the ratio should be between wearing the performance shoe for the actual performance and spending time in other kinds of shoes. I'm curious your belief on, do you think people should even compete in those shoes? Do you think it should be fully barefoot? Do you think it should be a ratio? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes. So most of the function of the foot, even in a sport, should obviously be inherent to the foot. The foot should be doing the performance. Where shoes for a certain sport make sense would be pickleball, right? You have to wear a specific shoe for pickleball. There's a reason why you need a certain tread or the bottom of a shoe for a sport like pickleball, right? How do you favor quick movements? So I actually find that a lot of the function of athletic footwear is in the sole. So a pickleball shoe is very different than a soccer cleat, right? And you have to be cleated. You have to actually grab into the ground. And if you were to wear a not formal soccer football cleat and you wear something else, you can get a lot of different injuries, especially in the knee and the hip, because you're not able to create any sort of torque or change of direction in the quick movements of thinking soccer and football, right? So that is a performance function of those shoes. Many people argue now as far as basketball, and you actually don't need a high top. There's actually more like mid top. Some will even play with even a lower top on that. One thing that's good to know is that Zero Shoes, which is a minimal shoe company, just launched a basketball shoe line. And you can actually see some of the NBA and WNBA players using the Zero Shoes when they're playing now. So listeners, definitely check that out if you're in basketball, is to check out that shoe. There are some other players in that are looking at, let's say, a football soccer cleat and saying, I understand the role of the cleat on the bottom and that you need traction, but does it have to be so narrow? Do we need to actually squish the toes in a soccer cleat, or could we actually get a little bit more splaying and natural alignment of the toes? There's a company called Natural Athletics that created a wide toe box cleat. So this is where you can see what features of performance footwear is actually needed. I find a lot of it is actually in the sole and the surface to shoe interface, and then the movements of that sport, right? That's really what you're looking at. And that's where most of that specificity is. The upper, the shape of the toe box, can we actually challenge that aspect a little bit more and get some actual digit movement into the shoe or into the cleat?
Definitely, that makes a lot of sense. I love that line where it's actually in the sole. I never thought about it that way. I love that. That's a really cool line. And I don't know if you've ever seen a picture of LeBron James' feet. There was I see you nodding. That was a very interesting like viral clip that went over social media after I think he was on the beach. He was not looking to expose it at all. He was on the beach or something. I think they took a picture of that and his toes were almost like crossed over each other. They were so narrow. And even at that time, people who weren't necessarily into like the barefoot wide toe box, anybody could look at that and say, oh, hey, that LeBron basketball shoe is so narrow. And I look at his foot and it almost looks like his foot has mirrored that narrow toe box from the LeBron. I just thought that was so fascinating.
Well, the funny thing with that, so I've been on lately a lot of NBA podcasts and IG lives and things like that. And a lot of the NBA players use Naboso products. And a lot of the strength coaches for the NBA are actually now more and more into barefoot. And they do their lifting barefoot or they're wearing minimal shoes. So that you're actually seeing this shift, particularly in that sport of almost every sport, NBA or basketball is the most embracing of barefoot lifting, training, etc. So that happened to come up because we were talking about toes and toe alignment, natural alignment of your digits to optimize peak foot strength, foot to core, vertical jump acceleration is long, straight, flat digits. I'm not making this up. This is physics. That this has to do with levers. And when you go into like a calf raised position or like you're about to push off, imagine a foot in the sprinter blocks, right? That position is called a rigid lever. A lever is how you catapult energy, right? And the longer the lever arm, the more torque you can create. This is physics. This is not in the book of Emily. This is Physics 101. So when you look at vertical jump, athletic performance, these NBA guys, ideally you would want the toes long, straight, and flat as possible. So then the photo of LeBron James comes up. LeBron James is an outlier. He's literally an outlier. So people to make an argument of no, the foot or the toes is not what's unlocking potential. So I don't need to focus on the foot. Or LeBron James is such a badass and an icon in basketball because he grips his toes like this. So no, that's actually what you need to do. It's like comparing apples and oranges. Like there's no association whatsoever on it that I would then still say, no, you got to get these guys into their big toe. You have to get them in toe spacers. You have to be doing things where you are teaching them how to actually activate their 26 muscles in their foot. LeBron James would probably continue. If they do, I haven't spoken to his strength coach, but we work with strength coaches for a lot of the other players. And what they see once they start to get into the digits is just catapult effect of their strength and their athletic performance. And they're the ones in the trenches with these players, right? They're not making a couch perspective of it. They're actually in the trenches with these players saying that. And they even mentioned this to me and they're like, we have naysayers to our technique of barefoot movement with these NBA guys. And they go right back to that photo of LeBron James. The naysayers do. And I'm like, that we're making association, right? I guarantee you, if LeBron James started to open up his toes and like really spread and get into his foot, which he should. If someone has a connection, please get him to be doing it. I bet he would be like, yes, I actually feel like I can get a little bit more out of my lower extremity, out of my jump. I just feel better.
That makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if you've ever seen climbing shoes as well, like bouldering shoes. That's another one that is it really surprised me when I started bouldering. I only started bouldering a couple years ago, but literally changing from like a wide toe box, like literally the wide toe box flat to like almost like talons. I want to say like they're very stiff and they're almost made so that you could like hook something, you know, like a small hold. And they're also like the saying is it's supposed to be painful when you put on that shoe. So I know a lot of professional climbers will downsize and they'll pick sizes that, you know, that's like 1 or 2 sizes smaller than their actual shoe size. I'm like, wow, that's a crazy one. And I'm curious, have you heard of that one? But also, actually, my main question was within the basketball community, actually, when I talk to a lot of physical therapists, I get a mixed review on this one, which is the actual contact that the foot makes with the ground. I've been getting like mixed results on that. So on one side, I hear that when you run barefoot, it's just kind of psychological that you're hitting the forefoot first instead of the heel because you can't slam the heels every time you're running barefoot. Versus I hear that the actual way to hit the ground and the contact is like a heel to toe kind of like a wave almost. And so even between the barefoot community and non-barefoot community, I've heard so many different things there. I'd love to hear, is that something that you see any data on where what's the correct actual pattern to strike the ground? Is this something that could be trained? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of research around proper running foot strike. And what I tell people is you cannot compare a walking foot strike pattern to a running. Running is not, it isn't this natural evolution from walking. You don't walk and then just start to like pick up your pace and your foot stays the same on it. They are different theories of energy transfer. Walking is what's called pendulum theory. Pendulum theory is essentially thinking that your leg is like a weight, right? Like a pendulum. So your leg, which is heavy and is behind your center of mass, is going to swing forward, and it swings forward in front of your center of mass, and essentially you fall forward. When you fall forward, your foot strikes the ground. You get these impact forces, which your body stores. But at the same time as you're striking the ground, the opposite leg is essentially being pulled like a bow and arrow, all your fascial tissue. And then when you release your foot and take a step, you release that bow and your back leg slings forward, again, another pendulum. Now it's in front of your center of mass and you fall. So it's a series of falls. It's called pendulum theory. It's kind of this bow and arrow or rubber band way of loading your connective tissue and transferring energy. There are foot rockers. So there's a heel rocker, there's ankle rockers, there's forefoot rockers, there's toe rockers, and that's essentially how we're pushing off like this. That's how you roll through your foot. Heel strike to forefoot, walking pendulum theory. Okay. Running is referred to as spring mass theory. This is a different way of loading your connective tissue when you run. And what that is based off of is you're going to contact the ground, forefoot, midfoot, maybe the lateral part of your heel, but you're going to come down and then you're going to compress. You actually flex all of your joints at foot contact when you're running, right? And your foot is under your center of mass, and then you're going to spring forward. That's spring mass theory. And kind of imagine someone running, right? As you run, you're essentially going to do like a little baby squat, a single leg squat, and then you go forward. Then you land on the other leg, you do a little single leg squat, you push off forward. So spring mass theory. So knowing that there are different mechanisms of energy loading and transfer, that's why I say you can't compare walking to running. the mechanisms are different, right? Now, the research as far as heel strike, midfoot, forefoot, and injury risk in runners, a runner could do any of the techniques, but it has to do with efficiency and injury risk. The most efficient foot strike technique for running is going to be more of a midfoot, and then they do heel, and then they take off. So it's kind of the lateral edge of the foot, technically midfoot. Some are a little bit more posterior. Then the whole foot contacts the ground and they spring forward. That would be a distance running foot strike pattern. Sprinting, totally different. Sprinting is not the same as distance running, the technique, right? So that is a forefoot strike, your heel never contacts the ground, and you're off. So totally different, right? People who run long distances with a heel strike pattern will always be a little bit slower. People who sprint with a midfoot to heel will be slower. So it just has to do with contact time and the appropriateness of the strike pattern. I'll share a really quick story about the running and how it makes a difference as far as speed. So I was doing a workshop and I had this parent in one of my workshops and they were like, oh, my kid, my high schooler is like so fast. I love my son. I want him to like be fast, whatever it is. But this is in the Midwest where the high school teachers are the track coaches because there's just no one to, right? Totally everyone understands this. And like the math teacher was the track coach, and because he ran track in high school, therefore he's qualified. So anyway, he was not teaching them technique of anything. And she showed me a video of her son running a 200 meter, coming out of the blocks, first place. So the first 100 meters, that kid was in first place because he's quick out of the blocks. All of a sudden, that last 100 meters, he's in last place. She's like, what is happening? Like, no one is helping him, right? So I looked at it, and he's actually running heel strike, that 200 meters. And I was like, he will never win that race as a heel striker. That's not how you sprint. You cannot sprint and run that fast heel striking, right? So that's just an example of essentially speed and the appropriateness of strike pattern. Most people, for the sake of what you're asking in this podcast, midfoot strike, you're doing a couple miles, that's what you're focusing on. If you heel strike because you are in traditional shoes, doesn't mean that you are guaranteed to get an injury. It's just associated with longer contact time. It's associated with increased chance of overstriding, which both of those together increases your injury risk.
Thank you so much for that. That felt like a masterclass of information of a question that I didn't even know to ask. I think the average person just thinks it's one foot in front of the other, whether you're walking, running a marathon, sprinting 100 meters, and that makes complete sense. And just the anatomy of the foot and the goal of the activity. Thank you. Like that made it very, very clear. To circle back to basketball, I love that basketball as a sport is exploring foot health and barefoot training in general. I come from a family of a lot of basketball players, and none of us were taught how to use our bodies. We were taught how to put points on the board. I was the only non-successful basketball player, to be clear here, but I played a lot. But what I see now is, now that we're all adults, each one of us who played basketball, we have very, very, very tight feet and ankles. And they're not functional, they're not healthy. And then everything on top of that seems to be falling apart slowly with age. Knees and hips and back. And I can tell that it's all related to the unforgiving tightness of the foot and ankle. And it brings me back to you mentioning, yeah, LeBron's an anomaly. So to use him as the scapegoat of like, see, it doesn't matter is a cheap shot. But you mentioned if LeBron were to actually focus on this and organize his feet and get healthier feet, we would actually see, progress output. And then I think like, yeah, right. He's been playing in the league for 20 years. His feet have how many thousands of miles of being stuck like this. There's no way that between now and the end of his career, we could actually see a noticeable difference in it. And I come from that perspective because I care about foot health, but I'm also stubborn and only do things I'm good at. So I have not seen a noticeable difference in my foot health changing, even though I'm aware and I care. Now, granted, maybe I'd be a lot worse off right now if I didn't. So I'll give you that. But how much noticeable change can you actually see? And what would be a good expectation? So I'm taking somebody and I'm opening them up to this world and I'm promising them brighter days in the future. But I need them to comprehend a reasonable dosage so that they don't just think, oh, yeah, I'm going to put toe spacers in and next week I'm going to be healthy. Like, what is a true expectation of how much effort, how much consistency, how much time before there's noticeable change in the dexterity of the foot and the health of the foot in organizing and strengthening it? I don't even know what to tell people because I feel defeated in my own progress.
So what I say to that is, you are right. We have to understand what is the outcome at which we're looking at. Most people that I see who are very similar to what you're describing, they're like, no, I've been for a year. I have been so meticulous, religious, consistent, whatever word you want to use with this foot program. And my foot is the same, right? And they're just like, ah. So what I tell people is, okay, one, the change is going to be based off of where you start and what your foot type is. That if you have a pancake foot or a severely overpronated foot, you got a big old bunion, that's going to be an extreme, but let's say that's what it is. We are not looking for structural change. That cannot be what the outcome should be. Now, to dive into that a little bit more efficiently, you're going to have to see me as a patient because there's way too many questions I have to ask with that. And I need to see your foot type. I just really need to understand the uniqueness of someone's situation. But for the most part, I tell people don't focus on the structure and the physical change of the foot. People get so wrapped around that. And if you are 35, 45, 50, whatever it is, and you're thinking that you're going to reverse your foot to how it was when you were 20, that's not realistic. So let's go instead on feel, function, right? What I would say, just in the case of LeBron James, is that's not going to change his athletic performance. He's like the peak of the peak. He's an anomaly, as we discussed. But I guarantee you, after how many years of playing basketball that he hasn't he been in the NBA for 15 years or something? Something, one of the longest, right? But it's also just his age doing high athletic performance. His body has to hurt. I'm sorry. I am sure he wakes up and he's just like, oh my gosh, to something, right? That because the feet are so connected to the rest of the body through fascial lines, the small muscles connect to the pelvic floor, they run to the top of the head, you have a lateral line, you have all these fascial connections that run from the bottom of the foot. He just might feel like, bam, I just don't have pain when I walk around. By the end of the day, I'm not like, ugh, right? That is a feeling that came from him prioritizing his foundation and the recovery of it. That's what I would focus on, let's say, for LeBron James. For the listeners, this is really a lifestyle. It is a lifestyle of small changes to your foot health habit routine. Toe spacers, releasing your feet in the morning. That literally is where I tell people to start, right? Get at least 30 minutes of barefoot stimulation every day. Walk around your home barefoot. I live in Arizona now, and everyone has tiled homes, and it's like 100 degrees for like over 100 days. It was crazy. So people are in house shoes because of the tile floors that are just really hard on the feet and the body. I get it, but can we still try to get barefoot stimulation every day? Get into more minimal shoes when you're lifting at the gym. Small changes, right? Consistently every day. And you're going for a feeling. Now, I get it. I get that that's not sexy and that's not going to sell it. But trust me on the sense of what people will feel. Look at some of the research studies of doing barefoot movement prep for athletes. And then there's always this thing at the end, and it always reduces injury risk in athletes. But there's always this little paragraph at the end that says, all of the participants at the end of the study said, can we please continue the barefoot movement prep after the study? Because they just felt more connected to their movement. They felt more authentic and natural, and they could just really feel from the ground up. again, that might not be a sexy sell. So I'm trying here, trying to give you some things. Be consistent with it. Small change, consistent every day will add up to something, feeling or function wise.
I love that. And Kevin's got the next question here, but I just had to say that I don't know if you guys have seen the longevity movement just really spike recently in the health span movement. But to me, the original guy of longevity and health span that got me interested when I was a little kid was LeBron James. This guy, like the original caption, LeBron James spends 6 figures on his health, right? It's probably more than that now for sure. And this guy was doing everything. Like before it was cool. He's doing, the cryotherapy, the saunas. He's got like makeshift, like all kinds of percussive like muscle stuff. And to see his feet like that now, after like admiring him for so long, except when he plays the Warriors for like a couple games because I'm in San Francisco, I almost second guessed myself because I was like, wait, how is it that he didn't like, am I looking at something wrong here where this guy's feet look absolutely like destroyed, but he's like the epitome of longevity and health span? I just had to make that comment there. I thought that was just incredible, but Kev's got the next question.
So, although your answer may not have been sexy, it made me feel a lot better because I'm sitting here beating myself up over the fact that I don't have monkey feet yet. Like my feet don't act like hands, my toes aren't as dexterous. But the reality of the matter is, I am 16 years into pushing my body to its limits in many different realms. And 16 years into it, my body feels better today than it has felt since the first year I got into fitness and exercise. My hips don't have pain. My back doesn't have pain. My knees don't have pain. So although I don't have monkey feet yet, my awareness of what my feet are doing, my focus on strengthening them and being purposeful with them has made a very clear difference. Because when I first asked the question, I was judging myself based on the structure of my foot, not on the actual life experience I'm having. And when you put it that way, it's like, wow, what, on one hand, sure, I'm going to continue to strive to get more dexterous feet. But on the other, I'm reaping all of the benefits that I was looking for. And I was kind of blind to it until you just mentioned that. So thank you very much again.
Yep.
And now I got to know about plantar fasciitis. So I have gotten plantar fasciitis several times in my life. And every time I do, I make myself a student of, okay, how do I get through this process the fastest? And it's like, all right, you freeze the ice cup, you massage your foot, you roll out a lacrosse ball, all these things. It all sucks. I don't enjoy it. It hurts. It doesn't feel effective. And I feel like the plantar fasciitis just runs its course in the same amount of time, whether I was to do nothing or not. I just reduce volume and then it starts to feel better. Now I have clients coming to me and I like to help my clients. And one thing that they come to me with is, I have plantar fasciitis. And they ask my advice. And I'm like, wait it out. Like, I don't know what to tell you. What is going on there? And how can we help people who are suffering from this experience and really aren't getting relief?
Yeah, so plantar fasciitis is one of those topics. It can actually be quite complex in the sense of where is the individual in this, like this roadmap or this journey of plantar fascial stress. I actually do a lot of lectures on it, and I classify and I differentiate and I flow people through essentially a flow chart of treatment to get them into finally a better situation. What I will say high level on it is that a plantar fascial flare up, stress, injury, fasciopathy, call it what you want, is a momentary micro tearing or immunoinflammatory response on the plantar fascia origin. Most often it happens from prolonged standing, running. You are trying to do a rubber band mechanism to your plantar fascia and it doesn't have enough elasticity. So you micro tear the actual fascial bands and then you essentially induce this repair response. What happens oftentimes in the case of plantar fasciitis, OSIS, is that you created an injury, you create this response, the body's trying to repair it, you feel a little bit better, so you think that you're in the clear, you're out of the woods, and then you start to stress your foot again. but you stress it too early. And then essentially this happens again. And then we get stuck in this cycle. And the patients that I typically see with plantar fascial symptoms is they are in a chronic state, which means they've had it for more than 6 months, or they've had it possibly for years, where it flares up, it eventually goes away, just resting time, whatnot. And then it flares up again, goes away, flares up, goes down. It's essentially this waxing, waning presentation that I share, which still falls under chronic. And what is happening is there's this typical tissue repair cycle. Let's just say there's 3 phases. We're not going to get into too much of it, but there's just A, B, C. Most people get stuck in B, and they literally cannot get to C. So I have to help them get through this repair process. It takes 3 months. It's very controlled. I do a lot of regenerative injections with patients. But what I will just say for the listeners, so they have a big takeaway, is to know where you are in this flow chart of what do I do to finally get past this, is you have to do a 2-week putting out the fire. This is what I consider it. Putting out the fire. You are going to do 4 steps. Minimize your tissue stress. That means no running, no jumping, no prolonged standing. Whatever essentially stresses your foot and your plantar fascia, you have to take that away or minimize it as much as possible. 2, you need to bring in support. This is going to be the anti to the minimal shoe. I need you in an arch support. Power step is over the counter. I need you in a supportive shoe. This is temporary. I need you to do something to give your foot a timeout. That's it. Just time out, everyone. Stop the stress. Get you in a supportive situation so we can time out. 3rd is we are doing focused self-myofascial or body work. So you're really getting after your calf, specifically your soleus, the lower muscle. You're getting into your forefoot, your metatarsals. You are not releasing and massaging right where that plantar fascia originates. So never massage right where you have pain. That is a no-no. You go peri or around it. Release your hips, release your pelvic floor. That's the 3rd step. And these things are every day. The 4th one is you are doing something for inflammation, whether you believe there's inflammation or not. I recommend systemic enzymes because systemic enzymes are naturally anti-inflammatory and they're antifibrolytic. So they work with the body's natural immunoinflammatory response. And you're doing that literally every single day for 2 weeks. After those 2 weeks and you being a superstar consistent on everything that I just said, you essentially reassess and say, where am I? If I was an 8 before and now I'm a 4, that's actually good. Keep doing it for another 2 weeks, then reassess. And then really I would need to get in there somehow and consult and guide them on the next phase. But let's say you're an 8 out of 10, you do this and you're a superstar for 2 weeks and you're like, I am still an 8 out of 10. Well, now this is something a little bit more. Did you tear your plantar fascia? Do you have severe degeneration? Is it actually not plantar fascial symptoms? And we have to do a differential. So then that's where I'll actually take those patients. And that's what most of my practice is these outliers over here that need a little bit more specificity or a little bit more digging in. We get an MRI, we do stuff like that. But this helps people to start to navigate it. I actually think everyone at the first symptom of plantar heel pain, be aggressive and do this 2 week. You have to over-treat plantar fascial symptoms because most people return to activity too soon and then they get stuck in this cycle.
I want to clip that response and have it on deck to give to people at the first sign of symptom. You can't avoid being on your feet.
Right.
Even if you stay out of the gym and you don't do anything intense, you're going to be on your feet. And I don't think people understand the impact that has and how much they really need to pull back to get ahead of this at the first sign of it, and learning your body enough to hear a whisper as opposed to waiting for it to be a scream. That's incredible. I wrote all that down. Thank you so much. This is going to be a huge tool for everybody I work with.
Awesome.
All right. I got a selfish question for you because when you mentioned soleus, my ears perked up. So this has been something that I've recently observed more now that I've had the problem and I've met more people with this, but no one really seems to put a finger on it. So let me give you a little context. So I ran a lot before, like a lot of distance, big distance runner. no soleus problem. I had ACL surgery, and for about 2 years, I put on like a lot of muscle where I just stopped distance running, a lot of muscle. Now, whenever I run, the first thing that pops up is the soleus. Now, the reason why I'm asking this is whenever I ask a lot of PTs, it's almost two sides of a different coin where it's like, I think it's the minimalist shoes. So I usually run in these or a Hoka. And then sometimes I used to run in these and they said, okay, it's either this guy or it's that one. And no one's really able to point it being to the shoes. Do you think, and this is going to be a very vague question, but I'm really curious. Have you ever seen that pop up in other athletes with the soleus, where the soleus is always fatiguing before? And does it ever have to do with the shoe, or is it more of a strength and conditioning issue?
So what I would say, this we'll keep it high level because there needs to be like what's your foot type and a full assessment around it, is between your two calf muscles. You have your gastroc, your soleus. Gastroc is higher and crosses your knee joint. Gastroc inserts onto the outside aspect of your heel. So it's on the outside of your heel. Technically, that makes it a everter. Your soleus, which is below the knee, so it doesn't cross the knee joint, is 2/3 of your calf muscle is soleus. So it's the larger, more dominant muscle of the calf, inserts on the inside of your heel. So it is theoretically a inverter supinator. When we push off and plantar flex, you are really using your soleus, not your gastroc. So the more powerful plantar flexor is soleus. Now, soleus is a synergist to the posterior tibialis. So what I would be curious, and this is the high level proposition that we could elaborate further on another podcast or however you want to do that offline, is the soleus doing the work of your posterior tibialis because of something in that muscle? That muscle really should be your primary supinator. It's the dynamic arch stabilizer. It is the powerhouse of your foot and ankle, is posterior tibialis. If it's not doing its job because of maybe your foot type or something, then soleus is going to jump in. And if it's fatiguing because of that, then that could be your symptoms.
Wow, I appreciate it. That has definitely got my gears spinning. And that was definitely the most concise anyone's ever hit that problem with so little context. So I appreciate that. And last question before we get you out of here. So let's say somebody has come in and they're like, okay, we've listened to this in the car. We've listened to this while doing the dishes. And we said, okay, Dr. Emily, we're sold. We're good. Okay. You accept everything that's been said on here today. And I want to leave today and I want to go out and go buy some things to start expanding my foot health. So either they right now have just regular shoes. We're talking regular streetwear. We're talking nothing and any sort of lacrosse ball, anything like that. No exercise equipment. Is there anything on your list that says, okay, let's start with these as the primary that you just recommend to anybody?
Yes, and I will be a little biased on these because of Neboso. So I own a company that sells foot recovery products. So I give that disclaimer ahead of time. First one would be toe spacers. And so at Neboso is the name of my company, and we are a sensory technology company. And all of our products outside of the toe spacers feature texture on them. I had shown the Neural Ball before. It has the texture on. If you're on the video, you can just see these tiny little pyramids that are stimulating the nerves in the bottom of the feet. So we sell toe spacers, but toe spacers would be what I would recommend. Start with 15 minutes of wearing toe spacers. I say at the end of the day, just as your form of recovery, you're home from work or from the gym, whatever it is, slide on the toe spacers 15 to 30 minutes. Yes, you can wear toe spacers in your shoes all day, working out, walking around. So if you like them and you want to wear them more, theoretically you can. Second would be getting in the habit of releasing the feet. The Neboso Neural Ball, this is $30. It's 2 balls. I have half of it. So it splits into 2 pieces. So you can release both feet at the exact same time. To me, I like that because it makes it very efficient. You can stand on 5 points on the neural ball domes, 20 to 30 seconds per point. When you brush your teeth, boom, 2 minutes, you're done. If you only have one tool and you got 2 feet, well, now you're like, this is 5 minutes, right? And anything, I try to minimize as much friction or barriers to compliancy in patients or individuals. So that's why I like the neural ball. Could you roll your foot on a golf ball, lacrosse ball, tennis ball? Sure. I just want people to release their feet. Those would be the 2 things that I would say. And then taking off your shoes and socks and being barefoot is free. So do that as well. At least 30 minutes.
There we go. And we really appreciate you coming on today. Could you please let people know where they could find you? Anything about your company, anything you want to plug?
Yes. So my podiatry page is thefunctionalfootdoc.com. So thefunctionalfootdoc.com. I do see patients virtually. I see patients all over the world. Most of my patients are virtual just based off of the convenience of the internet, but also I treat very different, as we obviously found out through our conversation. My Instagram is the Functional Foot Doc, so it's the exact same as my URL, so that is easy. Any of the Naboso products is naboso.com, naboso.com, naboso, and then that Instagram is naboso_technology. All of my websites and everything that I speak about is also on YouTube. So you can literally just search Dr. Emily barefoot and you will find hundreds of videos. A lot of them are education based. So I do a lot of free webinars through my education company. I've been doing that for the last decade. And then I have a lot of exercises and a lot of injury to exercise techniques. So I do it based off of condition. And I do have some at-home programs for patients as well. So I have a flat foot program, a plantar fasciitis program, and a bunion program. So people can essentially go through these 6-week programs to try to do the first phase of what they could do to help themselves. If they're not better from that, then I definitely say do a consultation because there must be something specific in there. But lots of education out there from me.
There we go. Well, thanks so much for coming on. This was a blast. I'm excited for people to hear this. Kevin and I were chatting on their end. We're like, whoa, this is so much fun. We were having a blast. So appreciate your time today.
Of course. I love to talk about feet. So thanks for the opportunity.